Harry's out to steal your heart. And that's the topic for Movie Battles. I'm the Lunchbox, and here we go. We're going to be doing a Valentine's Day actual movie battle special. So for Valentine's Day, instead of picking a lovey-dovey movie like most people would, I've decided to go straight out horror. So I decided to go with My Bloody Valentine from 1981 and 2009. And we're going to compare those two and see which one is better. So we're going to talk about 1981 to begin with. My Bloody Valentine in 1981 was a Canadian classic. Being a Canadian, I'm super proud that we are able to show some light on some of these great movies. This was a great slasher from 1981. Back, same with Prom Night. It's another great Canadian one. This was shortly after Friday the 13th, and it's kind of follows the same kind of lines as it, but giving you a totally different story. So when we're going to go with the 1981, let's just talk about where it's rated in horror as well. You got IMDb rates it 6.2 out of 10, which is a pretty decent score when you consider it's an old-ass movie from the 80s in the genre of slasher, which is not the most popular in the world. Popular definitely to the fans of the genre and fans of horror, such as myself. It is my favorite subgenre of horror movies. So this movie basically takes place in a little Nova Scotian town, and it's called Valentine's Bluff. It's a made-up city, as far as I know. I didn't actually take a look to see if it's real or not. In fact, I know it wasn't filmed in there. It was filmed in a different city in Nova Scotia. So what had happened in this, it's a mining community, and a while back, it's 20 years previous to when the movie starts, there was a big explosion that happened in a mine, and it was basically because the supervisors decided to go to the Valentine's Day dance, because Valentine's Day is a big thing in Valentine's Bluff, obviously. So they took off, and they didn't check methane levels or something like that, and it blew up, and 4 people died, but 1 survived. And that 1 survivor was Harry Warden. Now, he survived down there while they were trying to dig him out by eating the bodies of his friends. Pretty cool idea. And because of him doing that, he actually went insane. Makes sense. So so fast forward a couple of years later, I think it wasn't. I don't think it was right away. A couple of years later, he came back to town on Valentine's Day to kill those supervisors that had left their posts, and left a note saying that if they ever celebrated Valentine's Day or had a Valentine's Day dance again, that he would come back. So now let's fast forward to where we are in this movie. It's 20 years later, and they decided to have a Valentine's dance. So what do you think happened? He came back. So that's the basic plot of the movie. Now, and then you have this subplot in there where TJ and Axel and Sarah, there's a slight love triangle there. TJ's back in town and wants to get back together. That love story definitely feels very forced in the movie. I don't know really what to say about that. Other than, yeah, it seems very, very forced, and it didn't really need to be in there. I think just having a Valentine's Day story would have been enough. So when you start the movie, there's a really weird seduction scene at the beginning. I'm not giving too much away, but it's messed up. I don't really understand it. I don't know why it's there. It's kind of a weird thing. Going through, try not to give any spoilers into the movie. My favorite death scene out of the whole movie would have to be the shower scene. And if you check that out, it's one of the coolest horror scenes ever. Basically impales this woman onto a shower head, and the shower head's coming out of her mouth when you actually see her, and it's spurting water. Cool ass scene. Probably the best death scene in there. There was a lot of controversy in this movie when it was originally released. They had to cut like 9 minutes of footage that was just strictly blood and guts and stuff like that, just to make it so that it wasn't an X rating for the film. They needed to get down to an R so they could release it. I'd love to see that extra footage. Apparently they did make a release later on, back in, I think it was in 2009, just before 2009, before the new movie, because It was owned by Paramount originally, and then Lionsgate bought it. I believe they put out an uncut version. I didn't get to see that one yet. And then after that, they released the 2009 reboot or remake. One other thing to talk about when it comes to this horror movie is how, if you want to know how good it is, it's so underrated in the genre of slasher films. But one of my favorite directors, Quentin Tarantino, it's actually his favorite slasher movie of all time. So let's gotta say a little bit about it, right? So now going into the quality of the movie. The acting, it's kind of weird. There's not a lot of big actors. Most of them are Canadian, if not all of them. And they're not super well-known actors. A couple of them have a few things. There's one guy in there that's actually the voice of Sabretooth from the 90s X-Men cartoon, and a bunch of other of my childhood cartoons that I would have watched growing up. So that's kind of cool. The other thing is that I noticed pretty much everybody was on an episode or two of The Littlest Hobo. That's about as Canadian as you can get when it comes to films. The acting was actually really good. There's sections of it that are stellar, and then there's sections that are what you would expect from a no-name B-rated horror movie, right? So you got to give it a little bit of slack from where it's at. I thought it was really good. The quality of the filming is very low budget, obviously. Very 80s. It's very grainy to watch. I never got to watch it on the uncut version or the updated version that they brought out in 2009, which I'm sure they try to clean up a little bit. But I went from the original one, and it's tough to see. It's grainy as hell, but the set pieces and everything else was pretty good. Now to go into rating on this film. I have a really interesting rating system that I've developed for these battles, especially in the horror genre. We have 5 categories. The gore score, obviously, how much blood it is, and guts and interesting kills. You got the kill count, which is just the total number of kills. You have the Scream Queen, which is pretty much as it sounds. A good horror film always has some good screams. You got the Creep Show. Now that is in the horror genre when you got more that creepy feeling going on, that unsettling feeling when you're watching one that makes you unnerved. And then you have the Horror, which is just a broadband, where is it fit in the horror genre for how good it is, what's quality, whether it's an impact or new visual effects techniques or things like that. Really depends on, it's very general on what I think makes a good horror film. And then the last one is the most arbitrary of all of them, even though rating movies is pretty much as arbitrary as you can get. We're going to go with the Bruce Campbell effect. And that's real simple, is whether Bruce Campbell was in the film or Bruce Campbell wasn't in the film. Because all horror films, especially B, low-budget horror films, should all have Bruce Campbell in it. So as far as the 1981 version of My Bloody Valentine, when I go to the gore score, because so much got cut out, you have that shower scene, you have a few bloody moments in it, but not a whole ton. So it's pretty low. I mean, that shower scene does put a lot of impression in your mind. So I'm going to put that at a 2.5 bloodstains out of 5. When we go to the kill count, it's pretty straightforward. This one had a total of 16 kills. Now, I don't think that's all the kills that were on screen. I think it was 12 on-screen kills or reveal kills afterwards. I'm not going to count the minors in there, which I think that's in that 16. So the way I do it, I go between groups to give it its points. So with that, it's 2.5 knives out of 5. Next is the Scream Queens. Now, the Scream quality was actually relatively low. 80s was so good for Screams, especially when you want to compare it to another classic Canadian horror film, Prom Night, and you got the Queen of Scream in it, Jamie Lee Curtis. And that's actually how I base my Scream quality on. So this one's really low. I'm going to give it 1 Jamie Lee Curtis out of 5. For Creepshow, most slasher films, don't have very much creep. It's not an eerie feeling most of the time. There's a little bit when they're tracking them down and they have those moments where they're trying to hide. That gives you a little bit, but it's very, very little. That mostly sets you up for a jump scare or a big scare once it comes in, not an overall creep feeling. A good way to rate this is if you've ever watched Paranormal Activities. Those are creepy as fuck. Not much else. There's no gore in it. There's not really any gore in it, I should say. Not a lot of killing in it, but it just makes you feel uncomfortable. That's the creep. So I'm going to give this one only a half ghost out of 5. When it comes to the horror, the overall horror, I mean, this was a fantastic staple of Canadian horror filmmaking. Great addition to the slasher genre, especially since it was in the 80s, right in the mix of all the good stuff. Tail end of the 70s and the early 80s was where the really good shit was. So I'm going to give it a 3. I think 3 out of 5 zombie hands was probably good. Now, obviously with Bruce Campbell, the Bruce Campbell effect, it does not have Bruce Campbell in it, so it gets 0 Bruce Campbells. And that's a real shame because it was in his era. Like, especially at that time, he could have easily been in this film. I don't think he was really well known, and he's more of a States actor, not a Canadian. So it's unfortunate. So that's pretty much just a setup for My Bloody Valentine from 1981. Next, we're going to go into the 2009 reboot that Lionsgate put out once they owned the property. All right, on to the remake of My Bloody Valentine in 2009. So originally Paramount owned the original, and then Lionsgate bought the rights to it. And then they, shortly after that, brought out the edited or unrated version of the original. And then shortly after that, they came out with their remake. Now, they had a better cast in it. A lot of them went on to do really good things. Some of them didn't. Who knows that way. So you would think that the acting would be better in this one. But it wasn't. It was really bad. Especially Tom, the main character in it, one of the main characters in it. He's just terrible. Just stone-faced terrible. He's got like no emotion whatsoever to go on. So I would say way worse in that respect. So this was in the early days of 3D. I think 2005 is when the new age of 3D started coming out. And 2009, it was still kind of working out some of the kinks. And this was definitely one of those films, like nowadays, they make a film and it just happens to be 3D. Then they would do like this. It was called My Bloody Valentine 3D. And as soon as they add that 3D into the title, they screw shit up. Because they start trying to film in the mindset of 3D. So they put a lot of really stupid shots in there that make 0 sense when you're not watching it in 3D. You know, focusing on a gun swooping around so that it goes by your face and stuff like that. And it really makes it feel so bad to watch it. Kills any illusion that you have of being in the film. When it goes into the story of it, they changed it up a bit. Instead of being 20 years from the original catastrophe, now it's only 10 years. And instead of Harry Warden being a survivor and cannibalizing his friends, which is a way better theory and idea and thought, definitely a way better story. They decided to go with that he pickaxed everybody to death to save his own oxygen. It's not bad, but it's not as good as he went crazy because he had to cannibalize his friends to survive. So I don't know. I think they changed that part of the story badly. So then you go 10 years later and he wakes up from his coma and he just destroys everybody in this hospital. And it's bloody gory in there. You don't see any of the kills in there. I would have rather have seen that, but just bodies strewn about. There's people in half. Really cool. Really good way to start the film. And then he goes off to this mine and starts kicking the crap out of these kids. like killing all of them, and that's definitely in the genre of slasher. And at the end of that, that's when the end of the slasher film stops. So 10 years after this incident happens, the town's changed. It's definitely different than the original for where people are in their lives. Still has that little bit of a love triangle thing going on. But yeah, I think they ruined the story, because after that, it's no longer a slasher film. It's got slasher elements and slasher parts, but now it's a murder mystery. And I didn't need that. Yeah, the first one had a reveal on the killer that was really cool and interesting, but it had no part in the story. And it didn't need to be. It was more like, oh shit, look at that moment. Whereas this time, now you're looking, and when they do that, they screw it up every time. You know who the killer is when you're watching it through it. So why not do that? Like, it's... I would have been better if it would have been just straight, they thought Harry was still alive the entire time, instead of having this back and forth on figuring out who the killer is between the two. I definitely got to give props to the one girl in it for her death scene. I mean, she straight out does, I don't even know how long in the film it is. It's got to be 2 minutes of her solid naked throughout it, walking out in the middle of the cold in the street and then running away from a killer and hiding, and the entire time completely full frontal everywhere you can see, naked. Got to give her props on being able to do that. I'm not too sure why they needed to do it, but it was definitely new to see that kind of element in a horror film. Usually there's nudity, but not you're fully nude the entire time they're chasing after you and stuff. So it was kind of an interesting twist and choice there. So when it comes to the filming of this, there's some parts that are straight out 80s, especially right at the beginning. It gives you that 80s feel, which I really enjoyed. I like that look. The nurses almost dressed as they do in 80s style films, which was kind of a throwback, and I thought that was really cool. After that, it's really nicely shot, except for those 3D scenes that just are stupid and kill the mood of the movie. So give props there. But once again, like I said, the acting was just freaking terrible. I'm gonna say the best death scene in this one had to be the shovel in the mouth. Having a pickaxe wielding slasher villain is pretty cool. It's a neat idea, and I don't think I've seen it really in anything else. I mean, I think Jason once or twice picked up a pickaxe and killed somebody with it. But having it, that's your sole weapon, like that's their machete, that's a pretty cool idea. But he grabs a shovel and just puts it right through a person's mouth, and then you can see it, like the head kind of falling off of it slightly. That was probably the best death scene. It was pretty early on in the film, unfortunately. So going into the scorecard for this, when I go for the gore score on this one, it was way gorier than the original, that's for sure. They got away with a lot more in this than they did, obviously, in the original. So much so that in Australia, they tried to ban the movie completely and gave it a 18 plus rating, which is what they use for pornos down there. So it had quite a bit of gore. So I'm going to give it a 3.5 blood splatters out of 5. I've seen gorier. The benchmark for that, obviously, is Dead Alive. The amount of buckets that they use in that film is insane. When it comes to the kill count, it had a decent kill, I think. What was it? It was something like 37 kills, but not all those are on-screen ones. So I think it was 24 total on-screen deaths, which is pretty up there. That's a decent kill for sure. It starts off with a whole ton, and then it slowly dies off. One thing I gotta say for both films is they did include the dryer scene, which is a pretty iconic scene from the original, and I liked how they did it in this one as well. They incorporated, if you haven't seen the films, he stuffs a body into a dryer, and then you get to see it found in there. So that's pretty cool. That's an awesome scene. I like that. They also did some other throwbacks with the uniforms falling from the ceiling. You can pull on them and they drop down for people to get changed in the mines, and that's pretty cool. Going on to the did I actually say what the kill count was? The kill count was 3.5. I'm going to give that because it was quite a few deaths. So 3.5 knives out of 5. We're going to go down to the scream. Once again, this one did not have a lot of screams in it. So I'm only going to give it 1 Jamie Lee Curtis out of 5 as well. Creep factor, like I said previously, slashers don't have that very much, so it's only a half a ghost. The total horror score, it's not an original story. They tried to change it up. They screwed that stuff up. It's not original enough to make it cool. Not enough blood and gore to make it up for that. So I got to give it a 2. I'm going to give it 2 zombie hands out of 5 because it doesn't have that je ne sais quoi when it comes to the horror genre. And then obviously going down to the Bruce Campbell effect. No Bruce Campbell once again, which is unfortunate. I think he would have been cool to have in there, maybe as the old sheriff or something like that. Or as Harry Warden at the beginning. That would have been cool. But they didn't, so screwed it. So tallying up these 2 movies, you have the original that had a scorecard of 9.5. You have the new one, the 2009 remake, that had a scorecard of 10.5. So it's pretty close in that level. Then when you add into the acting was better in the first one, so it's bringing it up a notch. The storytelling was better in the original. Another thing that I liked from both, that actually the second one did better, was there's a scene where the killer is smashing light bulbs. And in the original one, it was just kind of a cool visual, but it didn't really pay off for any other reason other than that. It was kind of a cool visual. In the new one, they definitely made it more part of the story when he's slamming it into it, and you can actually see that the killer keeps changing. It looks like he has the costume on every time he smashes one on. Or every time he smashes the light, it looks like he has the costume on, and it just kind of flashes. Thought that was really cool, and it was at a very dramatic moment in the film. So I got to give that up to the new one. It did that one scene very much better. So going down to it, I'm going to have to give it to the original. The original is the better out of the 2. I definitely recommend watching both. They're both good horror genre slasher films. If you're into those, check it out. It's definitely worth a while. The original, though, if you want to see a classic and to know what slasher films are, that's the one to watch. Highly underrated. Definitely deserves to be up there more. So that's the end of the video. I'm going to just say Happy Valentine's Day and watch more movies.